The charter boat's engine sputtered and died, leaving me in silence broken only by waves lapping against volcanic rock. The captain, a weathered man of few words, nodded toward the shore. "That's it, Isle GRI 7. His voice carried no enthusiasm. 2 weeks, right? I'll be back on the 24th, weather permitting." I surveyed the desolate landscape stretching before me. Black and gray volcanic formations jutted from the earth like the backbone of some huge buried creature. The island wasn't large, maybe 3 square kilometers, but its jagged outline against the steel-gray sky had a stark, forbidding beauty. "Perfect," I said, shouldering my pack. "Just enough time to gather what the company needs." The captain helped unload my gear without another word. When his boat vanished over the horizon, the isolation hit me like a physical weight. I'd worked in remote places before, that was field geology, but never somewhere so utterly empty of people. Setting up camp took most of 2 hours. My 2-person tent for sleeping, a larger reinforced shelter for my lab equipment, and the solar panels to power it all. The company hadn't skimped on gear, at least. The portable core drilling system was top of the line, capable of pulling samples from depths up to 50 meters. With camp ready, I began my initial survey. The unique porous volcanic rock matched the satellite scans perfectly, a potential gold mine for industrial uses. Its honeycomb-like structure could revolutionize filtration systems if it held true throughout the formation. As I crested a ridge on the eastern side, I froze. The cliff face before me sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. The rock formations, weathered by centuries of wind and sea, had taken shapes that were disturbingly human. A dozen faces seemed to emerge from the volcanic stone, mouths twisted in what looked unnervingly like expressions of agony. "Pareidolia," I muttered, forcing a scientific lens onto it. The brain's trick of seeing familiar patterns in random stuff. I'd seen it before in Mars rocks, supposedly showing faces or animals in clouds. This was no different, just my mind playing tricks. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling those hollow stone eyes were following me as I moved on. The island's silence was crushing. No birds called, no insects buzzed. Even the sparse vegetation, tough mosses and twisted, wind-beaten shrubs, seemed to grow in funereal stillness. The only constant sound was a peculiar humming coming from the rocks themselves, made by wind passing through countless tiny pores in the volcanic stone. The hum was almost musical, rising and falling with the gusts sweeping the island. Sometimes it almost sounded like distant voices murmuring just below the edge of understanding. Fascinating acoustic properties, I recorded into my digital journal. The porosity creates natural resonance chambers. Could explain local legends about singing islands around here. By late afternoon, I'd mapped enough to pick my first drilling site, a fairly flat spot near the western shore where the rock seemed most consistently porous. The drill bit ground into the black stone with surprising ease, sending up clouds of fine dust the wind quickly blew away. As dusk fell, I pulled out my first core sample, a cylinder of black rock about 3 centimeters wide and a meter long. Even in the fading light, I could see the sample was riddled with perfect honeycomb-like chambers, exactly what my employers wanted. But something about the sample bothered me. The pattern of the pores seemed almost organized. Not random like volcanic formations should be. And as I ran my fingers along its surface, I could have sworn I felt it warm slightly under my touch. Just thermal conductivity, I told myself, securing the sample in its case. As darkness swallowed the island, the humming of the wind through the rocks deepened to a mournful, constant drone. I retreated to my tent, suddenly eager for the artificial light of my lantern. Tomorrow I'd start proper analysis. I had no reason for the unease settling in my gut. This was just rock, ancient, interesting, valuable rock. Nothing more. In the distance, the face-like formations were now just shadows against the night sky. But somehow, I could still feel them watching. I woke before dawn, my thoughts racing back to that core sample. Even exhaustion couldn't pry open a good night's sleep, just half-remembered dreams of stone faces crying out. I told myself it was just my brain making sense of weird formations, perfectly natural. The sample rested on my workbench under the harsh LED lights of my field lab. In that cold glare, the honeycomb pattern seemed even more intense than yesterday. I pulled on gloves and began the routine. Hardness tests, density checks, a first look at what it was made of. The first strange sign popped up under the microscope. The minerals weren't aligned randomly like volcanic rock should be. Instead, they formed neat, lattice-like structures. It looked arranged, organized. "Can't be right," I muttered. I tweaked the scope settings and prepped a fresh slice from deeper inside the core. Same pattern, everywhere. I rubbed my stubbled jaw, scrambling to recall any geological process that could cause this. Nothing came to mind. Moving to chemicals, I slipped a tiny fragment into the portable mass spectrometer. It whirred quietly, then spat results to my tablet. Started normal. Silicon, oxygen, aluminum, iron, typical basalt. Then came the anomalies. Sky-high phosphorus, weird carbon signals, and a few complex compounds flagged simply as unidentified. "Contamination," I said aloud, my voice feeling thin in the tent. "Has to be." I prepped another piece, drilled from deep inside where outside gunk couldn't reach. While it processed, I stared out at the cliffs. In daylight, the face-like forms were less obvious. Almost. But their arrangement still felt purposeful. Not random at all. The spectrometer beeped. The strange readings were still there. "Science says check everything. If it wasn't dirt from me or the air, maybe it was a compound my machine wasn't set up to spot." I reset the device and ran a deeper biochemical scan, the kind used to hunt microbes in extreme places. When the results flashed on screen, a cold, heavy feeling dropped into my gut. I ran it again and again. The machine found degraded pieces of human DNA. "Impossible," I whispered to the empty tent. Volcanic heat at formation would incinerate anything organic. Plus, the first age tests pointed to thousands of years old. Way too old for exposed DNA to hang around. I spent hours checking my gear, diagnostics, cleaning procedures, recalibrating sensors. Nothing fixed it. This wasn't surface mess. The DNA fragments were part of the rock's very structure, fused into the crystals themselves. Like they were mixed in when the rock was born. By late afternoon, I stumbled outside needing air. The wind had picked up, carrying that constant humming sound through the island's sponge-like stone. I stared at the cliff faces again, not as accidents of erosion, but as something intentional, something worse. As darkness fell, I retreated to the tent, hoping a fresh start would help tomorrow. I huddled in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind. Then I noticed the change. The humming wasn't just a noise anymore. Patterns wove through it, rhythmic swells and dips that didn't fit normal wind. I held still, straining my ears. The sound had a structure now, like far-off sighs heavy with sorrow, riding the gusts. I grabbed my recorder, clicked it on, and held it towards the tent flap. Wind interacting with porous volcanic structures creating unusual auditory effects, I forced out, clinging to fieldwork log speak, maybe due to resonance within the honeycomb formation similar to... I choked off the words. The sighs deepened, multiplied. They sounded like many weary breaths now, overlapping but distinct. The chorus brought back memories of hospital visits, the sound of people breathing through deep pain. Subject likely experiencing auditory pareidolia induced by isolation and heightened suggestibility, I recited, but my voice wavered badly. Then the sounds shifted again. Amongst those sighs and soft groans, for just a second, I could swear I heard my name, not spoken. Exhaled. Like the island itself, breathed the word Kelvin into the cold night air. My fingers trembled as I switched off the recorder. The rational scientist inside yelled it was only wind playing tricks on my rattled brain. But the part of me that found human DNA locked inside million-year-old stone wasn't so sure anymore. I lay awake for hours. The voices in the wind rose and fell. Were the faces in the rock trying to tell me something? The real question crushed down. Did I actually want to know what that was? Morning came with a dull, gray light that did nothing to lift my spirits. I'd barely slept. The wind's whispers kept me half awake, blurring dreams and reality. Each time I drifted off, I heard my name again, sometimes soft and longing, other times desperate and urgent. I forced myself through my morning routine, checking gear and prepping for the day's sampling, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knocked over my coffee mug twice. My mind kept circling back to the impossible data, human DNA locked inside rock thousands of years old, and those faces watching me from the cliff. "Get it together, Kelvin," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "You're a scientist. Act like one." I tried to focus on work, but my rational explanations were crumbling. Pareidolia doesn't explain DNA. Equipment malfunction doesn't explain hearing your name in the wind. I checked my schedule. I was supposed to drill another core sample from the western ridge, the area with the clearest rock formations that looked like people. My stomach tightened. I couldn't avoid it anymore. I needed to see those formations up close. I packed light, water, my camera, a sample hammer, and a first aid kit. The hike to the western ridge took nearly an hour, my boots crunching over loose volcanic rock. With every step closer, the wind's hum grew clearer, more organized, like it was building towards something. The formation loomed ahead just as I remembered, a cliff face about 30 feet high, carved with what looked like a dozen twisted human bodies. Mouths gaped in silent screams, arms reached out or shielded faces. From far away, I could pretend it was just random erosion, a trick of the light. But standing right below it, looking up, that comforting lie vanished. These weren't vague suggestions. They were horrifyingly detailed. I could see individual fingers, the curve of spines, the hollows of eye sockets. One figure near eye level looked like a woman with flowing hair, her face twisted in a silent wail, her hands stretched out as if begging for help. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, raising my camera with trembling hands. I took several photos, capturing what no natural process could possibly create. The air around the rocks felt different, heavier, charged, like before a lightning strike. The hairs on my arms stood up. I moved closer slowly, fighting every instinct screaming at me to run back to camp. The figure of the reaching woman pulled me in. Her stone fingers seemed to beckon. I lifted my hand, hesitating inches from the cold surface. The tingling in the air got stronger, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. "What are you?" I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. I touched the stone. Pain exploded up my arm like an electric shock, dropping me to my knees. The island's constant background hum suddenly sharpened into a deafening chorus. Hundreds, maybe thousands of voices, all screaming, pleading, crying out in agony and despair. I heard snatches of words in languages I didn't know, but their meaning was clear. Help us. Join us. Stay with us forever. And beneath it all, something older and deeper, watching me with terrible hunger. I yanked my hand back, scrambling away on hands and knees, gasping. The voices faded, but didn't vanish. They lingered just out of reach, a constant reminder of what waited inside the rock. My right hand, the one that touched the stone, felt wrong, numb and cold with a strange heaviness. I stared at it, half expecting to see it turn to stone, but it looked normal. Yet when I tried to flex my fingers, they moved sluggishly, like pushing through thick mud. A bone-deep chill settled inside me, even though the day wasn't cold. I struggled to my feet, suddenly exhausted, as if I'd been running for hours. My limbs felt like lead. My thoughts were foggy. I needed to get back to camp. I needed to call for extraction. I needed to get off this island now. The trip back took twice as long. Every step was a fight. I had to stop several times just to catch my breath. The island's hum had changed for me. I couldn't pretend it was just wind anymore. I was hearing voices, countless voices, all trapped and suffering, and they knew my name. Back at camp, I collapsed into my chair, shivering uncontrollably, even wrapped in my sleeping bag. The cold wasn't outside. It radiated from within, like something had sucked the warmth right out of my core. I tried to write down what happened, but my right hand was clumsy and stiff. The pen kept slipping from my grip. I grabbed my satellite phone. Protocol didn't matter anymore. This wasn't geology. Something was happening to me, something I couldn't control. I needed evacuation. But when I turned it on, the screen showed no signal. Impossible. These phones work anywhere with a clear sky. I went outside, holding the phone high, moving around to find a better spot. Nothing. Just faint rhythmic static pulsing in time with the island's hum. I was cut off. Alone. And as the sun began to set, stretching long shadows across my camp, I felt the weight of countless stone eyes watching me from every ridge and outcrop. The island wasn't just a place anymore. It was aware, and somehow, impossibly, it had marked me as its next victim. I slept fitfully that night, if you could call it sleep at all. The chill that had settled in my bones after touching that formation refused to dissipate, even wrapped in my thermal sleeping bag with an extra blanket. It felt like the cold was coming from within rather than without. My right hand, the one that had touched the stone, remained stiffer than the other, the fingers slightly resistant when I tried to make a fist. Morning brought no relief. My joints ached as I forced myself up, feeling like I'd aged decades overnight. The stiffness had spread beyond my hand now, creeping up my arm and settling into my shoulder and neck. Even my thoughts felt sluggish, as if trying to wade through concrete. Just dehydration, I muttered to myself, draining a full water bottle despite not feeling particularly thirsty. Or maybe a touch of hypothermia from yesterday. The rational explanations sounded hollow even to my own ears. This wasn't dehydration or exposure, it was the island. Somehow, it was changing me. I checked my watch, 9:37 a.m. Nearly 3 hours later than I normally started my day. I'd lost time, and that scared me almost as much as the voices had. The extraction team wasn't scheduled to return for another 11 days. I couldn't wait that long. My satellite phone was the priority now. I fished it from its protective case and powered it up, willing the signal strength bars to appear. One bar flickered briefly, then disappeared. Come on, I pleaded, raising the device skyward. Nothing but static hissed back at me. I moved outside the tent, rotating slowly, searching for any hint of reception. The static changed as I turned, becoming rhythmic, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the island's constant hum. When I pointed the phone toward the western ridge, where I'd touched the formation, the static grew louder, almost drowning out my thoughts. The GPS unit was next. I switched it on, hoping for coordinates I could relay if I managed to get a signal. The screen flickered to life, but instead of the familiar satellite positioning data, it displayed an error message. Signal lost, recalibrating. The numbers that occasionally flashed were nonsensical, placing me thousands of miles from my actual location, then suddenly in the middle of the Atlantic, then somewhere in Russia. Panic began to rise in my chest, a pressure that made it difficult to breathe. I forced myself to focus. Higher ground might help with the signal. There was a promontory on the island's eastern edge I hadn't yet explored, rising about 40 meters above sea level. If anywhere on this god-forsaken rock could reach a satellite, it would be there. The walk was agonizing. My joints protested with every step, and the ever-present cold had seeped into my muscles, making them leaden. What should have been a 30-minute hike took well over an hour. I had to stop frequently, each time noticing how the stiffness seemed to advance incrementally during these rests, as if the very act of standing still allowed the island to work on me more efficiently. The eastern promontory offered a commanding view of the churning sea, stretching endlessly to the horizon. Not a ship in sight, not even the distant trail of an airplane overhead. Just endless gray water meeting endless gray sky. I raised the satellite phone again, moving it in a slow arc. Nothing. Not even static now. Just dead silence. As I lowered the useless device, something caught my eye. A narrow fissure in the rock face, barely visible from my angle, seemed to lead downward to the waterline. Driven by some inexplicable instinct, I carefully made my way down, using handholds in the volcanic rock. The fissure opened into a sheltered cove, hidden from the rest of the island by towering rock walls. And there, half buried in the black sand and partially fused with the surrounding rock, lay the rusted remains of what was unmistakably a fishing trawler. The vessel's bow protruded from the volcanic stone as if the island had swallowed it from behind, consuming it inch by inch. I estimated it to be at least 50 years old from what remained of its structure. My heart pounded as I approached. Scattered around the wreck were the ghostly remnants of human presence, a corroded metal toolbox, rusted fishing equipment, the remains of what might have been a life raft, now nothing but tattered canvas and metal rings. Most disturbingly, I found a dented metal flask, its surface eaten away by decades of salt and time. When I picked it up, I could just make out faded Cyrillic lettering on its side. Russians? How far had they drifted off course to find this unmarked hell? I searched desperately for any sign of the crew but found nothing. No remains, no personal effects beyond the tools of their trade. It was as if they had simply disappeared or been absorbed. A chill that had nothing to do with the island's supernatural cold ran through me. I wasn't the first to be trapped here, and what had happened to those sailors was now happening to me. By the time I struggled back to camp, darkness was falling. The effort had drained what little energy I had. I collapsed into my camp chair, staring blankly at my equipment. All the sophisticated technology, all the careful planning, rendered useless by whatever force controlled this place. As night deepened, the whispers returned with newfound clarity. No longer content to remain a background chorus, they seemed to spiral around my tent, probing for weaknesses. Kelvin, they sighed, my name now a constant refrain in their ghostly symphony. Join us, Kelvin. Come outside. We're waiting. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside my head now. We were like you once, they murmured. Visitors, explorers, until we became part of the stone, part of the island, part of forever. I must have fallen into a fitful sleep because I jerked awake suddenly, standing barefoot outside my tent. The cold rock beneath my feet felt almost warm, almost welcoming. I had no memory of leaving my sleeping bag. The whispering had stopped. In its place was expectant silence, as if the entire island was holding its breath, waiting for me to take another step toward... what? I stumbled back into my tent, zipping it closed as if the thin fabric could possibly protect me. In the dim light of my emergency lantern, I examined my right hand. The skin had taken on a grayish cast, and when I pressed my thumb against the palm, it felt rougher, almost gritty, like stone. The island wasn't just watching me anymore, it was claiming me piece by piece. Sleep was impossible. How could I? That gritty, stony texture on my right hand crawled up my wrist, inch by painful inch, as the hours dragged. I wrapped it tight in a bandage, an empty gesture. It was like sticking a Band-Aid on a growing tumor. Something was growing inside me, digging in. No relief came with dawn. Dark storm clouds swelled on the horizon, churning like a spreading infection under the skin of the sky. The barometer was plummeting. This wasn't an ordinary storm. The island itself seemed to have summoned it. Frantically, I grabbed the satellite phone. I jammed my stiff fingers randomly at the buttons, desperate. The screen flashed once. Instead of a signal, a single awful image burned onto it. A face twisted in silent suffering. It vanished before I could truly understand what I saw. The first winds slammed into my camp as I was double-checking the tent stakes. They didn't just howl, they screamed. A mad chorus of voices rode the gale. My name echoed within the roar. Kelvin! 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 The wind screamed my name, each cry louder, more demanding than the last. "Leave me alone!" I bellowed, my voice instantly swallowed by the storm's fury. Driving rain hit like horizontal needles, stinging my cheeks. I threw myself back into the tent and zipped it shut. The thin walls bulged inward, pulsing, threatening to tear away. But the assault wasn't just physical. Something worse was invading me. With every thunderclap that shook the ground, jumbled visions flooded my mind. They weren't dreams or even hallucinations. They were memories, but not mine. A bearded man frantically clinging to ship's rigging while massive waves tried to tear him loose. The cold horror as seawater filled his mouth and chest. A woman stumbling blind through thick fog, crying out on dark rocks. Her fingers were raw and bleeding as she crawled through the endless dark. Another geologist, like me, screaming silently as he watched his boots fuse permanently with the island beneath his feet. These were someone else's deaths. The island was force-feeding them to me, showing me the fate of every soul lost here. The stiffness had spread up my right arm to my shoulder. I pushed up my sleeve. Patches of my skin had turned splotchy gray, rough and porous like volcanic stone. When I pressed a finger against it, tiny particles crumbled off like brittle ash. Then my world collapsed. The wind tore the tent from its moorings, ripping it away. Icy, stinging rain poured instantly over me as I lay exposed on my useless sleeping pad. I was pinned, but not by the ruined tent. The island itself was pushing its will onto me, a heavy command. Be still, sink in, join us. A strange, soothing warmth spread through my limbs, cutting through the freezing rain like nothing natural. Fighting panic dissolved into a terrifying calm. Why fight it? The island wasn't killing me. It was welcoming me, choosing me. I'd never be cold or alone again. No! My own scream ripped through the numbness, jolting me. With agonizing effort, I forced my heavy legs under me. Stand. One step, another. Each movement was defiance, yanking myself against the island's crushing desire to make me yield. Lightning tore the sky open. In that terrifying flash, the island revealed its hellscape. Hundreds of them. Faces trapped in the rock, bodies half-formed, straining to rise from the cliffs, mouths open in soundless shrieks of eternal torment, all watching, all calling to me with outstretched stony arms. Stumbling blindly, driven by pure animal terror, I lurched toward the shore. If I could reach the water, if I could swim. The storm made it suicide, but staying? That promised slow petrification, being swallowed whole. The rock beneath my boots felt odd, soft, not like mud, soft like yielding flesh. Every step, my feet sank deeper. The black stone flowed up around my ankles, encasing them as thick as water. My mind cracked under the pressure of 1,000 invading deaths. The raw, accumulated despair of everyone lost here slammed into me. My legs finally gave out. I buckled, falling heavily onto the slick, dark surface beneath me. As my cheek pressed into the rock, I didn't feel cold stone. Instead, warmth washed over me. Recognition. Welcome. An old friend embracing me at last. My right arm was stone now, indistinguishable from the ground, merging seamlessly with the island. Outside, the driving rain slowed. The screaming wind dropped to a low sigh. In the eerie, sudden quiet, I heard a new voice joining the chorus, a voice choked with terror, buried deep within the porous stone. My voice. As consciousness dissolved into the endless rock, one final terrible truth burned in my fading mind. I wasn't dying. I was just beginning an eternity of silent screaming.